The Friday night crowd at the Gilded Vine moved with a slow, expensive grace. It was a dance Elena knew by heart. She weaved between tables, a silent figure in a stark black dress and a crisp white apron, her hands steady under the weight of heavy porcelain plates. The air smelled of seared scallops, aged wine, and a subtle, woody cologne that seemed to be worn by every third man in the room. Her eyes, a calm shade of hazel, took in everything without seeming to look. She saw the tightening of a jaw on a man discussing stocks, the way a woman's finger tapped nervously against a champagne flute. Information was a tool here, as important as the polished silverware she laid out. Table 6, the elderly gentleman with kind eyes, liked his bourbon neat, no ice, and he appreciated a quiet refill before he had to ask. Table 2, the severe-looking woman in the emerald green dress, required her salad dressing on the side, in a specific little porcelain bowl, not ramekin. Elena remembered it all to the people who filled the plush velvet booths. She was a part of the machinery. They saw the efficient hands, the polite nod, the soft, "Of course, sir." They did not see the person. Their conversations flowed around her, like water around a stone talk of mergers, gallery openings, summer houses in the south of France. It was a world of visible trophies, the watches, the handbags, the confident laughs that filled just the right amount of space in the very center of the dining room. Sitting on a low, spotlighted platform was the true jewel of the room, the piano. It was a beast of gleaming, polished ebony. Its lid was propped open like a giant black wing, revealing the perfect ivory-white teeth of the keys. On Friday nights, it had a voice. A rotation of performers, always men in crisp tuxedos or sleek suits, would play. Their names were printed on small, elegant cards placed on the tables. They played smooth jazz, familiar classical pieces, nothing too demanding. It was audio decoration, a symbol of the refinement you were paying for. Elena's path through the room always, inevitably, curved near the piano. When she carried trays of empty glasses back to the kitchen, she would take the route that passed closest to it. As she moved, her left hand, free and trailing at her side, would sometimes flex. Her fingers, strong from carrying trays, would press against her thumb in a silent, rolling sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. A scale. No one ever noticed that her story was not in the room with her. It was in a small apartment across town, in the silent, stubborn calluses on her fingertips, hidden by the soap and water of constant washing. It was in the memory of a childhood living room, crowded not with fancy furniture, but with music stands and the warm wooden scent of an old upright piano. Her grandfather, a man with gentle hands and a thick accent, had been her first teacher. He didn't teach her from books with smiling cartoon notes. He taught her from his heart, playing folk melodies from his homeland, songs that told stories of hills and rivers and loss. He showed her how chords could feel like colors, a deep blue sadness, a golden burst of joy. She had been good. More than good. She had won competitions, her small, serious face looking out from local newspapers. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Her grandfather passed. College was expensive. The competitions led to scholarships, but not enough. The dream of a conservatory, of a life built entirely on music, slowly faded like a photograph left in the sun. It became a private thing, a secret room inside her. She took jobs. She waited tables. The piano became something she visited in practice rooms when she could afford the rental fee, or in fleeting moments on a silent electric keyboard in her apartment. Headphones on so as not to disturb the neighbors. The Gilded Vine job was the best one she'd ever had. The money was decent. The clients, while distant, were not usually cruel. And there was that piano. Sometimes, late at night, after the last customer was gone, and the staff was wiping down tables. The cleaning crew would come in. One of them, an older man with a kind smile, would see her looking at the instrument. Once he had waved her over. "Go on," he'd said. "It won't bite. Just a quick touch. I won't tell." Her heart had hammered against her ribs as she'd approached. The stage felt higher than it looked. She'd slid onto the cool leather bench, so different from the worn velvet of her grandfather's old stool. She'd laid her hands on the keys, a perfect, cool smoothness. She hadn't played a song. She'd just pressed down a single, rich middle C note. The sound filled the empty, dark dining room, pure and profound, vibrating in the silence and in her bones. It was a feeling more than a sound, a longing so deep it felt like a physical ache. That one note was enough. It was a promise and a goodbye, all at once. Back in the flow of a busy Friday, she pushed the memory away. She focused on table 5, where a demanding party was celebrating something. A man with a loud, confident voice was holding court. He snapped his fingers vaguely in the air, a gesture meant for anyone nearby. Elena was the one who caught it. "More water here, and tell your pianist to take the volume down a notch." "We're trying to talk business," the man said, not really looking at her, his eyes on his companion's. Elena followed his glance towards the piano. The evening's performer, a man with slicked-back hair, was playing a pleasant, inoffensive version of Moon River. She simply nodded. "I'll see what can be done, sir." As she turned to get the water pitcher, her eyes swept over the pianist's hands. They moved competently, safely. They never strayed from the simple, predetermined chords. They did not speak. A strange, quiet fire flickered in her chest, one she quickly smothered. That was not her place. Her place was here, with the water pitcher, with the ordering pad, with the invisible smile. She delivered the water, her movements fluid and unseen. The loud man continued his story without a pause, without a thank you. As she walked back to the service station, her path, as always, took her near the piano. The spotlight made the polished wood gleam. For a fraction of a second, as the hired pianist transitioned to another safe tune, she let herself imagine it. Not the fantasy of applause or stunned faces that felt hollow. She imagined the weight of her hands on those keys, the connection, the sheer physical conversation between her soul and the stringed heart of the instrument. The release of all the music she kept locked inside. The melodies from her grandfather, the complicated, angry pieces she'd learned to master her frustration. The sweet, sad songs for her loneliness. It was a vivid, colorful thought that lasted only the 2 seconds it took to walk from table 5 to the swinging kitchen door. She pushed through the door, and the real world of clattering pans and shouted orders swallowed her whole. The piano's melody was muffled, then gone. She tied her apron a little tighter, took a deep breath, and picked up 2 steaming plates of duck confit. The performance out there would continue without her. It always did. She was the waitress. The music, like everything else in the gilded vine, was for other people. The night hummed along on its usual track. Elena moved from the kitchen's bright chaos back into the dining room's low, golden glow. She delivered the duck confit, her face a mask of polite attention, as the loud man at table 5 complained the potatoes were not crispy enough. She nodded, promised to bring a new portion, and glided away. Her system for dealing with such things was well practiced. A quiet word to the chef. A note on the order ticket. Keep moving. The hired pianist finished his set with a soft, fading chord and received a smattering of polite applause from those not too deep in their conversations. He stood, gave a small bow to mostly indifferent room, and packed his sheet music into a leather portfolio. Elena watched him from the corner of her eye as she cleared a nearby table. He looked bored. To him, this was just another gig in a long line of gigs. He didn't glance at the piano with any particular feeling as he walked out the staff entrance. The instrument was left alone on its island, a silent, black monolith under the spotlight. For the next half hour, the silence from the piano was subtle. The background noise of the restaurant, the clink of cutlery, the murmur of talk, the faint swoosh of the bar mixer seemed to grow louder to fill the space. It wasn't an awkward silence, not yet. It was an absence regulars were used to. There was always a break between performers. Elena was filling sugar bowls at the service station when she felt the shift. The manager, a man in a perfectly fitted suit who usually moved with a calm, surveying pace, was now walking too quickly. His eyes darted from his watch to the front door, back to his watch. A tiny line of sweat gleamed at his temple. She saw him pull his phone from his pocket, put it to his ear, and his expression tightened. The conversation was short. He shoved the phone back into his pocket and ran a hand over his hair, a rare sign of disorder. Trouble, then. And in a place like the Gilded Vine, trouble usually meant something was disrupting the carefully bought illusion of perfection. She guessed it was the next pianist, the one scheduled for the prime third set, the one whose name was on the cards. A well-known local figure, a man who played for the city's symphony and lent an air of serious culture to the Vine's Friday nights. Her guess was confirmed when the manager, looking slightly pale, made a beeline for the hostess stand. He spoke in a low, urgent voice to the young woman there. A minute later, the hostess was carefully, discreetly, removing the small, elegant cards from every table that announced the pianist's name. The silence from the piano platform began to change. It was no longer just a break. It was a void. In a room so full of curated sensory details, the soft linen, the specific scent of the candles, the exact level of lighting, a missing element became glaring. The loud man from table 5 was the first to voice it. He raised a hand, not snapping this time, but waving impatiently. "Manager." "A word?" The manager put on a professional smile and strode over. "Sir, how can I assist you?" "The music," the man said, his voice carrying. "It's been dead for 40 minutes. This place is starting to feel like a library. A very expensive library." A light, nervous titter went through the surrounding tables. The manager's smile tightened. "My deepest apologies. Our featured performer has been unavoidably detained. We are working on a solution." "Well, work faster," the man said, turning back to his guests with a roll of his eyes. "Honestly." The manager retreated, the professional calm cracking around the edges. Elena saw him scanning the room, not for a waitress, but for a customer. His gaze landed on a table of well-dressed older ladies who sometimes came in after the theater. One of them, he knew, played piano for charity events. He approached them, oozing charm. "Ladies, a small crisis. Our pianist is ill. I don't suppose any of you would grace us with a tune or two, just to fill the air? Drinks, of course, would be on the house for the rest of the evening." The ladies smiled, flattered, but waved him off with laughs. "Oh, goodness, no," one said. "Not in front of all these people. I only play for my grandchildren, and they're a captive audience." The manager tried another table, a young couple on what looked like a first date. The man shrugged, embarrassed. "I took lessons for a year when I was 10. I only remember chopsticks." A slow, sinking feeling was spreading through the room. The elite patrons, so used to having their every need anticipated and met, were facing a problem money couldn't instantly fix. The silence was now awkward. Conversations felt forced, having to compete without the gentle blanket of music underneath them. The elegant room felt exposed. The manager was growing desperate. He stepped a little closer to the piano platform, his voice a bit louder, pitched to the room. "A complimentary round of our premium cognac," he announced, "for any guest who can entertain us with a piece or two. Just to bridge the gap." This offer brought more attention. There were amused glances, raised eyebrows. A businessman in a corner booth nudged his friend. "You play, don't you? Go earn us some free drinks." The friend shook his head, laughing. "Not a chance. That thing is a beast. I'd ruin the mood forever." It became a kind of parlor game. People looked around at each other, guessing who might have the secret talent. But no one moved. The risk was too great. To fail in front of this crowd, to be the source of a clumsy, amateurish noise in this temple of refinement, it was social suicide. The piano, from being a jewel, was becoming a monster in the middle of the room. A challenge everyone was afraid to accept. Elena watched all of this from the shadows near the kitchen door. A tray of empty dessert plates heavy in her hands. Her heart was doing a strange, hard drumbeat against her ribs. She saw the manager's face, now sheened with a fine sweat. She saw the dissatisfied set of the loud man's jaw. She saw the way people were starting to look at their watches. The evening's magic dissolving. The fire she had smothered earlier, the one that flickered when she watched the hired hands play so safely, was now a live coal in her chest. It wasn't about proving anything to them. It wasn't about the free cognac or the manager's approval. It was about the piano itself. It sat there, silent and magnificent, being treated like a prop, like a problem. Its voice was being wasted. The memory of that single pure note she'd played in the empty room vibrated in her bones, louder than the complaining voices, but the fear was paralyzing. If she tried and failed, she would be a joke. She would lose this good job. The quiet anonymity she relied on would be shattered. They would always point at her, the waitress who thought she could play. The weight of her grandfather's legacy felt heavy. What if she dishonored it? What if her fingers, stiff from carrying trays, betrayed her? The manager made one last, hopeless scan of the room. His shoulders slumped, just a little. He was going to have to make an announcement, to apologize, to let the silence win. That small slump of his shoulders did something to Elena. It broke the paralysis. Before her mind could catch up with the sheer madness of it, her feet were moving. She didn't walk with purpose. She almost floated, as if in a dream. She set the tray of dirty plates down on a vacant service stand. She wiped her hands, suddenly damp with sweat, on her apron. The black fabric of her waitress dress felt like a costume. She approached the manager from the side. He was pinching the bridge of his nose, his back to her. The room's chatter felt distant, muffled. She touched his elbow, very lightly. He jumped, startled, and turned. He looked down at her, seeing his employee, a problem solver of spilled wine and missing steak knives. Not a solution to this crisis. His expression was impatient, stressed. "What is it?" "Not now." Elena's mouth was dry. Her voice, when it came out, was not the clear, polite waitress voice. It was softer, thinner, but it didn't waver. "I can play." He stared. He blinked. For a few seconds, he simply didn't process the words. He saw her uniform, her careful ponytail, the faint tiredness around her eyes from a long shift. "What?" "The piano," she said, her voice gaining a tiny fraction of strength. "I can play it. If you need someone to play." His look of stress melted into one of pure, unguarded skepticism. It was as if she had offered to perform brain surgery. "You? Don't be ridiculous. We need a proper." He trailed off, because there was no proper pianist. There was only the silent monster in the room and the growing discontent. His eyes searched hers, looking for a sign of a joke, of hysteria. He saw neither. He saw a deep, unsettling calm. The noise of the restaurant seemed to press in on them. He let out a short, breathless laugh, a sound of pure desperation. He had exactly zero other options. The silence was now a tangible, embarrassing entity. "Fine," he said, the word sharp with doubt. Fine. Just something quiet, classical, nothing fancy. For God's sake, don't make a spectacle. Just fill the silence. He waved a dismissive hand toward the platform, as if sending a lamb to the slaughter. He was already turning away, mentally calculating the damage control he would need to do when she inevitably failed. Helena didn't watch him go. She looked across the room at the piano. The spotlight seemed brighter, harsher. The walk across the patterned carpet felt like the longest walk of her life. She felt every eye in the room slowly turning toward her, the waitress out of place, moving toward the one thing she had no business touching. A few people near the platform stopped talking, their faces blank with confusion. Someone at a nearby table let out a quiet, disbelieving snort of laughter. She reached the steps. She climbed them, her legs feeling like wood. The grand piano loomed over her, bigger and more intimidating than it had ever seemed from the floor. She stood beside the polished bench for a moment, her back to the room. She closed her eyes. She didn't see the rich patrons or the manager's doubtful face. She saw her grandfather's hands, rough and gentle, on the keys of the old upright. She heard his voice, not in words, but in the melody he taught her, the one from the old country dot she took off her apron. It was a simple, deliberate motion. She folded it once, neatly, and placed it on the corner of the piano bench. It was a small act, but it felt huge. She was shedding the skin of the waitress dot then. She sat down. The cool leather of the bench greeted her. She adjusted its height automatically, a muscle memory from 1,000 hours of practice. She smoothed her simple black dress. She extended her hands, and for the first time in public, in front of the world that thought it knew her, she laid them on the perfect, waiting keys of the gilded vine's grand piano. The silence in the room was now complete. It was a heavy, waiting kind of silence, thick with curiosity and a low hum of judgment. All the polite chatter, the clinking of glasses, even the distant sounds from the kitchen seemed to have been swallowed up. Every eye was fixed on the figure on the platform, the waitress in her plain black dress, sitting at the grand piano, which now looked even larger and more important behind her. A few people at the table closest to the stage exchanged glances. One woman raised her eyebrows, a small, pitying smile on her lips, as if watching someone about to humiliate themselves terribly. The loud man from table 5 leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, ready to be annoyed. The manager stood frozen near the hostess stand, his hand over his mouth, already regretting his desperate decision. Helena did not see them. The world had narrowed to the space between her hands and the keys. The ivory was cool and smooth under her fingertips, familiar and foreign at the same time. She took a breath that felt like the first real breath she'd taken all night. Her shoulders, which had been carrying the invisible weight of trays and orders and expectations, dropped just a little. Her posture changed. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but something in the line of her back straightened, not with stiffness, but with a kind of readiness. The careful, closed-off posture of the waitress was gone. In its place was the focused calm of a musician about to speak. She didn't start with a gentle, tinkling melody to ease them in. She didn't play something safe and classical, as the manager had begged. That would have been a lie. The music inside her wasn't safe. It had been stored away for too long, and it needed to come out honestly. Her hands lifted slightly, then fell. Not onto a single timid note, but onto a rich, complex, and questioning chord. It was a low, resonant sound that didn't just hit the ears. It vibrated in the chests of everyone in the first few rows. The sound was so full, so confident and unexpected, that the woman with the pitying smile flinched, her smile vanishing. Before anyone could process that first sound, Helena's left hand began a driving, rhythmic pulse deep in the bass notes, a heartbeat of restless energy. Then her right hand flew in, not with a tune, but with a cascading run of notes that climbed up the keyboard like a spray of water, glittering and impossible to catch. It was the opening of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, but not the simplified version often played in lounges. This was the full, demanding, technically terrifying real thing. The change in the room was instant and electric. The loud man's crossed arms fell to his sides. He sat forward, his head cocked. The manager's hand dropped from his mouth. His eyes widened. This wasn't filling silence. This was shattering it. Elena was gone. The person playing was someone who had lived inside her, in a small apartment, for years. Her face, usually so carefully neutral, was alive with concentration and feeling. Her eyes were fixed on some distant point beyond the piano, seeing the music, not the room. Her fingers, those same fingers that had just been wrapping around a water pitcher, were now a blur of precise, powerful motion. They danced, they hammered, they caressed the keys. The complicated, syncopated rhythms of the jazz piece were second nature to her. She swayed slightly with the bluesy sections, her body feeling the swing. During the furious, racing passages, she was perfectly still except for the lightning in her hands. A busboy had been pushing a cart of dirty dishes through the double doors from the kitchen. He stopped dead in the doorway, his mouth hanging open. The head chef, a large man with a permanent frown, came out to see what had caused the unusual quiet. He stood there, wiping his hands on a towel, listening. At the tables, people weren't just listening. They were being overtaken. The music was too big to ignore. It was a story being told in a language everyone understood, a story of city lights and longing and wild joy. The businessman who had been complaining about the silence now had his chin in his hand, utterly absorbed. The woman who had pitied Elena now watched her with a hand pressed to her chest, as if trying to keep her heart from beating out of rhythm with the music. Elena moved through the piece's moods effortlessly. The tender, lyrical moments sang under her touch, each note rounded and full of emotion. The explosive, chaotic sections were controlled fury, every note in the storm perfectly placed. She wasn't just playing the notes written by Gershwin decades ago. She was telling her own story through them. The years of quiet observation, of serving people who didn't see her, of carrying dreams in her apron pocket, it all poured into the music. The frustration came out in the stabbing, sharp chords. The hidden hope soared in the sweeping, rising melodies. She finished the Rhapsody with the famous, slow clarinet-like line, letting the last note hang in the air, sweet and fading. There was no applause. Not yet. The room was too stunned. It wasn't just that she could play. It was that she could play like that. Like a world-class performer who had been hiding in plain sight. For a moment, there was that same heavy silence, but now it was a silence of awe, not of waiting. Elena didn't stand up. She didn't even look at the audience. She seemed to gather herself, her shoulders rising and falling with another deep breath. The first piece had been a declaration, a bursting open of a door. What came next would be different. Her hands settled back on the keys, but the energy changed completely. The driving jazz rhythm was gone. She began to play something else. It was a melody no one in the room recognized. It was slower, simpler at first, a solitary line of notes that wandered like someone lost in thought. This was her own composition. It was the music of her grandfather's living room, of the folk songs he hummed, filtered through her own loneliness and resilience. This piece had no fireworks. It was all feeling. It was the sound of a late-night bus ride home after a long shift. It was the quiet pride of a paycheck earned. It was the memory of an old man's hands guiding hers. It was beautiful in a raw, aching way that the polished Gershwin, for all its brilliance, was not. As she played, something even more remarkable happened on her face. A single tear escaped, tracing a clean line down her cheek. She didn't sob. She didn't even seem to notice it. It was just there, a physical proof of the truth coming out of her. She was no longer performing for an audience of elites. She was finally, after all this time, playing for herself. She was playing for her grandfather. She was playing for the girl who used to win competitions and believed in a different future. The people in the room felt it. They felt they were no longer spectators at a show. They were witnesses to something real, something private being offered publicly. The socialite who never looked at servers found she couldn't look away. Her own perfectly manicured life felt suddenly shallow compared to this depth of feeling. The financier who dealt in cold, hard numbers felt a lump in his throat. This was an asset you couldn't quantify, a talent that had been right beside him all along. Pouring his coffee, the melody built, layer upon layer, growing from a lonely thought into a powerful, hopeful anthem. It wasn't a happy song, but it was a strong one. It spoke of enduring, of remembering, of carrying a flame in the dark. When it finally resolved, with a series of chords that felt like a slow, accepting sigh, the last note seemed to dissolve into the air, leaving behind a profound quiet. Elena's hands came to rest in her lap. She sat there for a few seconds, head slightly bowed, coming back to the room, to her body, to the feel of the leather bench beneath her. The spotlight felt hot on her skin. The silence around her was no longer hers. It belonged to the 100 people sitting in the dark, holding their breath. Then it broke. It started with one person, the elderly gentleman from table 6, who liked his bourbon neat. He began to clap, not a polite patter, but a slow, solid, respectful applause. It was joined by another, and then another. In seconds, the room erupted. It wasn't the light, distracted applause they gave the hired tuxedoed pianists. This was a roar. People were on their feet. They were cheering. Whistles cut through the noise from the back, where the kitchen staff had gathered. The sound washed over the platform. Elena blinked, the real world rushing back in. The faces were no longer a blur. She saw them now standing, their expressions of shock transformed into pure, unguarded admiration. For a moment, she just looked at them, her own face pale with the effort and emotion. Then, almost instinctively, she did the only thing that felt right. She stood up from the bench. She wasn't tall, but on the platform, in that moment, she seemed it. She gave one small, humble bow from the waist, her eyes on the floor. It was not the bow of a performer claiming praise, but of a person acknowledging something that had passed between them. Then she turned. She picked up her folded apron from the corner of the bench. The simple white cotton looked absurd now, out of place in her hands. She walked down the steps, the applause still thundering around her. She didn't look left or right. She walked straight through the tables, a path opening for her as people continued to clap. She moved like someone in a dream, heading not for the kitchen, but for the service station, for the sanctuary of the familiar routine. The music was over. The waitress, for now, had to return. The applause followed her like a wave, crashing against her back as she walked. The sound was so loud, so physical, it made the air feel thick. She kept her eyes fixed on the service station ahead, that little island of order with its coffee makers and sugar bowls. It was a target to aim for. Her hands, which had just commanded the entire room, now trembled slightly as they clutched the folded apron. The adrenaline that had been a roaring river was receding, leaving her feeling lightheaded and strangely hollow. She reached the sanctuary of the service station and leaned against it for a moment, her back to the room. The polished wood felt solid, real. The noise behind her began to change. The standing ovation softened into a buzz of excited conversation, but it was a different kind of buzz than before. It was higher pitched, charged with discovery. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her back, like pinpricks of heat. She had to move. She couldn't just stand there. With practiced, automatic motions, she unfolded her apron and tied it around her waist. The familiar weight and knot centered her, pulling a piece of her old self back into place. But it was like putting on a coat that no longer fit. The fabric felt different. She felt different. The manager reached her first. He moved quickly, his face a mask of pure, stunned delight. All the stress and skepticism had been burned away, replaced by the gleam of someone who has just stumbled upon a gold mine in his own backyard. That was. "I have no words," he said, his voice low but vibrating with energy. "No words. Why on earth didn't you tell me? All this time." He didn't wait for an answer. His mind was racing ahead. "Forget the rest of your shift. Absolutely forget it. I want you at that piano every Friday night. No, twice a week. We'll put your name on the marquee. We'll raise your pay double, triple. Just say the number." He was talking at her, not to her. His eyes were already seeing posters, press releases, increased covers, and a higher price for the tasting menu. She was no longer Elena the waitress. She was Elena the phenomenon, a business opportunity in a black dress. Before she could even form a reply, they were surrounded. Patrons flowed from their tables, drawn to the epicenter of the excitement. They didn't surround the piano. They surrounded her. A tall woman with severe silver hair and a necklace of heavy pearls was the first. She pressed a thick, cream-colored business card into Elena's hand. "My dear," the woman said, her voice cultured and firm, "I chair the board for the City Philharmonic's Young Artists Fund. You will call me on Monday. We must discuss a proper audition. This," she waved a hand dismissively at the restaurant, "is no place for a gift like yours." A man in a bespoke suit, the one who had been discussing mergers earlier, smoothly inserted himself. He offered his own card. "Forget the Philharmonic. That's a dead-end road. I manage talent. Real talent. I can have you in recording studios, on tour, with the right branding. We need to move fast, capitalize on this moment." He looked her up and down, not with a leer, but with the calculating eye of an appraiser. "The story is perfect. Absolutely perfect." They came one after another. A smiling man from a local festival, a woman who ran a popular music streaming series, a wealthy-looking couple who wanted her to play at their daughter's wedding. Money is no object. The cards piled up in her hand, a little stack of possibilities, of escape routes from the life of trays and tired feet. Each person spoke of potential, of futures, of a destiny she had supposedly been denying herself. Elena nodded, her polite waitress smile mechanically returning to her face. "Thank you," she murmured, over and over. "Thank you so much." But the words felt empty. This onslaught of attention was more overwhelming than the silence before she played. Then she had been in control, in her own world with the music. Now she was a piece of property everyone wanted to claim, a story they wanted to own. She caught glimpses of her regulars. The elderly gentleman from Table 6 gave her a slow, deep nod of respect, his eyes kind. The loud man from Table 5 was now her biggest fan, loudly telling anyone who would listen that he had known there was something special about her all along. It was a lie, but he seemed to believe it now. Amidst the crowd, she saw the other waitstaff. They hung back near the kitchen door. Their faces were a mix of awe, confusion, and a touch of hurt. They had shared the grind with her, the sore feet, and the difficult customers. They had been a team. Now she was being pulled into a different orbit, and a gap had opened between them. One of the busboys, the one who had stopped in the doorway, gave her a shy, thrilled thumbs up. She tried to smile back, but it felt weak. The manager, seeing the crowd, gently but firmly took her elbow. "Let's get you somewhere quiet," he said, steering her towards his small, glass-walled office at the back. It was a tactical move both to protect his new asset and to continue his pitch away from the competition. The office was soundproof. The second the door closed, the roar of the dining room became a muted hum. It was suddenly terribly quiet. The manager gestured to a chair. "Sit, sit. You must be exhausted. Can I get you water? Champagne?" Elena just stood. She looked at the pile of cards in her hand. Each one represented a door swinging open, a path she had once dreamed of. But the way they were offered felt wrong. It felt like they weren't interested in her music, but in the story of her music. The waitress who was a secret genius. It was a neat, packaged narrative they could use. She started, but her voice was hoarse. She cleared her throat. "I need to finish my side work. The sugar bowls." The manager laughed, a big, hearty sound. "Nonsense. That's all over. You're an artist now. Look at these." He pointed at the cards. "This is your life changing. Right now." But that was the thing. Her life had changed, but not in the way he meant. It had changed 20 minutes ago on that piano bench, when she played her own composition and felt her grandfather's presence beside her. That was the real change. This the cards, the promises, the manager's glittering eyes. This was just noise afterwards. She thought about the offer. The raised pay, the name on the marquee. It was seductive. To play the piano for a living right here, to never have to carry a heavy tray again. But the idea of performing here, night after night, for this same crowd who would now see her as their discovered pet, their dinner entertainment with a fascinating backstory. It made her feel cold. The piano would become a job again, just a different kind. The freedom she felt while playing would be traded for a new set of expectations. "I need to think," she said finally, her voice firmer. "I need some air. And I should really help close down my section." The manager looked baffled. How could she be thinking about side work at a time like this? But he saw the set of her jaw. He was a businessman. He knew not to push too hard and risk losing the prize. Of course," he said, switching to a tone of deep respect. "You've had an emotional night. Take all the time you need. But we will talk tomorrow, yes?" She nodded, just to have an agreement that would let her leave the office. She slipped the stack of business cards into her apron pocket, where she usually kept her order pad and pens. They made a stiff, awkward bulge. When she stepped back into the dining room, the atmosphere had settled, but it was charged. Every head turned as she walked to her assigned station. The few remaining diners watched her with new eyes. As she began to clear a table, a woman reached out and touched her arm. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she said, her eyes sincere. That felt different. That felt real. Elena finished her work. She refilled the sugar bowls, wiped down the counters, polished the last of the silver. The familiar, mundane tasks were a relief. They required no thought, no decisions about her future. Her co-workers were hesitant at first, but then one of the other waitresses, a woman with a kind face, came over and bumped her shoulder with her own. "You know you've completely ruined every other pianist for us, right?" she said, and the gentle joke broke the ice. They smiled. The gap was still there, but it wasn't unbridgeable.